All right. What are we talking about today, Raminderpal?
Hey John, yeah, it's good to be back at the table, right? A lot going on out there in the world. Um, Thinking about so if you take the topic of technical debt, and it's a big topic, right? You know, these are massive topics, and we've spent many times talking about. I'm sure we'll come back to the bits and bobs. But if I'm running an R&D org, I'm going to try to be as efficient as possible in how I spend my money, what I buy, the build versus buy, and all these different things. But actually, most orgs are quite inefficient. And they start big and they have plans and they end up kind of losing a lot of money, time and money, both of the sort of similar things. Although in a large company, of course, time is a spent cost, so they don't really count time often, and they should. Um, but actual green dollars they do count. I think we should go through this topic and go through the different bits and bobs and just learn from you and learn from the conversation. Why is that going on, and what creates those habits, and what can we do about it?
Yeah, it's a fascinating thing that goes on in the industry. Um, and there's definitely, not one answer or one situation. It's pretty broad and diverse. Um, I think some R&D organizations have unlimited money in a way, if you think about it. And then there's some R&D organizations that are either bootstrapped or are very tight with money, and they don't have the luxury to spend on technologies, advanced ways of working. They'll pull back. They'll be back in a little more of the Stone Ages than their cousins or their peers in life sciences or other places that are highly invested in.
Right.
Um, but technical debt is it's very interesting that there's all different flavors of technical debt. Um, Given what I just said, that the companies that pull back might have technical debt in the ways of very old equipment and difficult ways of working, and they can't get away from that. And life sciences companies that are very well funded might have technical debt that is because they bought, two of everything, and it's not being used, or it's being used in not great ways, and it kind of, again, it's a overhead and a problem in the organization. So there's all different types of flavors of technical debt. I think finding that balance, which is, you have these conversations all the time. The pendulum always seems to swing from one end to the other, and people can't find that middle ground. And so these are what I've observed as technical debt challenges. They get compounded, though, when it comes to things like integration. Like, okay, hey, we've got all of our shiny toys, and we've got all these
Yeah.
capabilities, and we want to now tie them together and make it seamless and this and that. And again, the technical debt comes into play when people do this in a very point to point way, or they boil the ocean and some of the things they're trying to do, and they spend years perfecting a scientific software platform, and then it's kind of it becomes antiquated, and they're like, oh my gosh,
By
we've
the
got this mass.
yeah, by the
Yeah,
time they get there, by the time they,
by the time they get there, they have this massively integrated, spent millions of dollars, and they're like, new technology came out and it just blows away this old way of working now. And people are like, oh my God, we can't get rid of it. We just spent millions of dollars on this. We're stuck with it. And so technical debt is very tricky. That's what I'm trying to say here. I'm not articulating it well, but so you have to find out, and you have to work very hard at minimizing your involvement, your integration, your stickiness of some of these tools, so that when it comes time to replace them, it's not a multi-million dollar problem and a multi-year situation, right? So that's the enterprise, that's the large organization part of technical debt.
which by the way
Um,
is a classic software engineering principle, modularity, Modularity,
Yes.
if you have an architecture in software, your modularity is one of the non-functional requirements, NFRs they call them, one of the NFRs you have to worry about. Now, do people actually worry about it? Probably not enough. And that's what causes these problems. But I would say that the people who are building these systems are not pure blood software engineers. They're kind of coming from science into software, and they don't get the long-term traps, which I think you're pointing to, of
Yeah.
not taking, software engineering principles into account.
But again, this is a very important part. You can over engineer from a software engineering perspective something that maybe only has a shelf life for 2 or 3 years, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So it's this balance and trickiness. And so, when I lived in pharma, we used to get, we are not a software company, John, right? But I'll tell you, we wrote a boatload of software and they still do today. So there's this dichotomy or this um what am I trying to say? There's this personality conflict of
Yeah,
who
I was
are
going to
we?
say
What are
it's
we
your
doing?
personality, and even things like bioinformatics, right? I mean, that's software programming. Where are you going with that? You write
Absolutely.
thousands of lines of analysis code in notebooks, and what happens if a new analysis platform comes the next day? What are you going to do? If a new type of approach for a new type of analysis comes live, how do you switch to that? That's a software engineering
A-
problem.
Actually, this is a very important use case. And look, by the way, people, we haven't talked about any of this. This is not pre-planned. This is us just getting out and
Yeah.
talking about things that we've experienced. So bioinformatics, if I had $100 for every time somebody's got angry with me and said, John, I spent the last 15 years building this platform. It's mine. I own it. I run it. It's my team. It's this, it's that. Why would I go
Sure,
and buy
sure.
this new software or do this or that? They get upset about it, right?
Yeah.
And on the contrary, I also run into organizations where their head of bioinformatics left and nobody knows what to do. What's with the environment. They can't understand it. They can't figure it out. They don't know what's what, and it's a disaster. So
Because it's all hokey code.
it can be hokey code, or again, it's not documented anywhere. So
Yeah.
the fiefdom that was created is there's no one in charge. There's nobody who understands it, and to unwrap that, to undo that knot is a very large undertaking. And um, so these are real problems in the industry. They're multi-million dollar problems for small organizations. They're tens of millions of dollars of problems for large organizations, and it it's I don't know if it's totally preventable. So that's part of this conversation, right? But I think a lot of it is preventable. A
I think
lot of it,
I think with principles it's preventable. The question is, do people who have not come from that background where principles matter? I mean, I'm talking about, and I mean, coming back to software engineering, and I do agree with your comment about not over engineering, but the
right?
principles of software engineering have come from 100 years or 50 years of people having scars. I'll give you one example.
Yes.
Give you one example. When I graduated from my first, undergraduate, this is in 91, a few years ago. Um, Electrical engineer coming out of London, Imperial College, and one of the biggest hirers was Arthur Anderson IT. And their claim to fame is they'll ship you to Chicago for 6 weeks. And actually, they're shipping you outside Chicago to a training base, and then you'll learn IT because it was IT consulting. And the language they were teaching was COBOL. Now, you have to be pretty old to know the name COBOL. The COBOL was a
Right.
business, it was a business language, a programming language for business
Yep.
applications decades back. And what they had made was a very strong business consulting companies who had legacy COBOL code and couldn't maintain it. And this is decades back, and it's the same problem you're describing when, a director of bioinformatics leads. There's legacy code sitting there. They spend a lot of money trying to maintain that code.
A lot of money, a lot of effort, and so this comes back to, we get asked this 3, 4 times a month.
Right.
John, what's the best environment for us from a scientific informatics, from a scientific IT, R&D IT perspective? Um, and for industrialized science in industry, it's a hybrid approach. It's that platform ecosystem. There's an article written in the Harvard Review uh, years ago where an organization, a large pharma, could buy a scientific software platform, but they have full configuration and God forbid, but if needed, customization of that platform. They're not reliant on the software vendor to do it. They could if they want to, but they're not reliant. So what they get is a commercial off-the-shelf platform out of the box, but then they can take it and turn it into what they need it to be. And now they've got the commercial part of it, and then they have their part of it. And the more that you adopt, the more that you concede and configure and use from a commercial off the shelf perspective, the better off you're going to be. It's going to cost you less money in the long run. Upgrades, everything that you do in these days, it becomes more seamless, not a mountain moving exercise every time this software gets upgraded. And then when you get into a GXP environment stuff, that's a whole nother ball of wax. But so, hybrid, right? th there could be a case where the company is completely aligned with whatever that software provider is given, and they don't need a hybrid system. They can go commercial off the shelf. It's configured, and that's the end of it, right? So all these assessments need to be done
Yeah.
along the way to figure that out to reduce this these unfortunate or unneeded dependencies and technical debt and things like that. Um, the problem is decision making in these organizations becomes very difficult. It becomes influenced. It becomes fragmented. I didn't get my way, so I'm going to go off and do my own thing because I don't like what they've selected.
And
We
they
have
could reflect that by saying, well, there's an open source alternative. Let's try both. And
Yes. Oh yeah, yes. So
that's
open
another.
source. Again, an R&D organization, someone in the organization says, "Oh, we're not spending that money on this. We're just going to go with this open source." Fantastic. Except when it comes to support and it becomes maintenance and all these other things. And it becomes, if not managed properly, which happens, I won't say all the time, but a lot of the time,
Yeah.
then it becomes technical debt because somebody leaves or it's just sitting there and people are like, what is this? Right? Why is this here? Who's using it? And there's no metrics, there's no understanding. And now it just added to that big garbage can of frozen debt. And now what do we do with it? I've come from organizations that have had 15 ELNs because of all the mergers and acquisitions they've done. They've had, I forget how many registration systems, maybe 8 chemical registration systems. Like, you can't fathom this. You're like, oh, John, that's not true. Trust me, it's true. Uh, uh, 12 limb systems. Again, because of how they evolved in their journey in the company, how they were disconnected. Maybe it was M&A, whatever it may be. But at some point, somebody's left holding the bag, and they're like, "Oh my God, how are we going to fix this? How are we going to do this?" And you got to remember, end users are dug in to the way they're doing things. So now you're telling them, "Hey, we're going to be taking that away from you and replacing it with someone else." And now here's another lesson learned. I can't tell you how many times that replacing it with something else is less than what they currently had. It's it's like you drive a Mercedes around, a nice Mercedes, expensive Mercedes with all the bells and whistles, and one day somebody comes and says, "We're replacing your car. We're giving you a Yugo." And that's how you're going to get back and forth to work. And let me tell you, the experience is night and
And
day, right?
what's interesting about that is that the people proposing it, they think they've got a Rolls Royce, but the perception of how it's received and how it's used is a Yugo experience. So,
Exactly.
so the engine is on steroids, like for example, we will talk a lot about, Gen AI and AI.
Yeah.
All this stuff is in the engine in the back office, but actually what the user is experiencing is a Yugo.
Exactly. And look, I'm going to use the word criminal, right? It's criminal what has been done in some of these organizations that we are involved in and we work with over the years currently, that a IT organization comes in and says, "Hey, we're getting rid of this piece of software," and I won't go into the details why, but it's not for the right reasons all the time, and they're going to replace it with something different. And then they put constraints on, because they can't really afford it, they're going to put constraints on how they're going to use that software. And trust me, nobody wants to use the software under those constraints. It's a waste of effort, a waste of time. It maligns the vendor, the new vendor coming in. They can't get done what they need to get done because they're under these
Yeah,
constraints.
yeah,
And now the end user say, this software is a piece of junk. It's a piece of crap. We can't
yeah,
use it. It
yeah,
doesn't do this. It doesn't do that.
yeah,
And the vendor gets maligned. And in fact, it's the IT organization that didn't do it right.
yeah.
And
And
so,
a lot of that's user experience. They didn't get a grip on the user experience that's required. Well, they got a grip on
at all,
it.
not at all. The user stories, the requirements, how they interact with the software, how they're going to do the value. What are we trying to achieve? Like, it's not done.
Yeah,
But what was done is how we're going to save the company money. And when in fact they lost money for the company, they potentially impacted discoveries and development, and they completely screwed this all up. And now they have more technical debt. Okay, because now the user community says this new piece of software is no good, when in fact it could be perfectly suitable for what they're doing.
yeah,
Now they'll go through an exercise. They're going to go hire uh, 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 a large consulting company, a generalist,
yeah.
who's going to come in and tell them what they want to hear, because they know they're going to have 4 or 5 years of consulting now
And adding
around
bells
something that could have been easily solved.
and adding lots of bells and whistles to make it look like the previous version. Yeah,
Correct.
yeah, yeah,
Correct. But the problem is, there's two problems. One is they implement. So this is a journey you go on. This isn't just like we select a piece of software and we implement it and it's over. That's just the beginning, right? I talk about this until I'm blue in the face. But and then there's problems. The implementation isn't done properly, or they keep it as a paper on glass. Let's say it's an ELN. They keep it on a paper and glass for too long. We're talking 3 to 6 months max in a large organization. And then you start implementing new templates and making it. They don't do that. And then they say, okay, we're going to get rid of it now. But the problem is those end users never use the tool properly. So what makes you think they're going to use the new tool properly
no,
without proper change management, uh, configuration, whole thing? We're talking a major effort. This is a $30 million program at a large pharma today. You pick one of the top four ELNs, you have, you know, tens, 20, 30, 40 departments in this organization. You have a ton of work to do. You have to deploy it. You have to hypercare. You have to configuration. It ends up to be a total cost of ownership, 30 plus million
and
dollars. And
I don't think anybody actually plans for total cost of ownership. In
this
fact,
is a great conversation. Go ahead, keep going, and then I'm going to tell you what happens.
my experience in large companies, back in the States was their eyes are always on green dollar spend. And they would say they push the approval on the green dollar spend, and then the response is sure, but don't ask for headcount.
Right,
Work it in what you've got. So
right,
so you got your current commitments. Now you got this thing you have to deploy, and we're approving the green dollar spend on this, but don't ask for extra headcount. Don't ask to slow down your slow down your current milestones, to delay things. And sometimes even worse, they won't approve the green dollar spend until you commit to productivity increases on the as is state. So without this, it would have taken me two man years, person years. But with this, I can do it in one person year, so I can drop a head count. So they even make you cut people down when they agree to
exactly.
green dollars.
But there's this portfolio planning that goes on, right? And so I guess I always have to be careful what I say, but I'll just say it. And I think sometimes people appreciate research is sometimes, depending on vantage point you're looking at, the group that's not getting the funding. Because think of this, as you get closer to market with a pharmaceutical, a therapy, it starts costing a lot of money,
Yeah,
but you got to get that
yeah,
to market. It
yeah,
can't, you don't want it to fail.
yeah,
There's a lot of failure, more than anybody wants. But the more money you put out at the end, and if you can get it over the line, then the money starts to come back in the organization, just like any other revenue and any other type of company. So development, clinical, manufacturing, they're going to get a lot more money to make sure that return on investment happens sooner, and then we can take some of that money, give it back to research and stuff. But the problem is research isn't always going to get that funding. So what happens in the portfolio planning is somebody says, "Oh, we're going to give $12 million to research for a new ELN," right? And they're thinking that's enough money. Okay. And then it comes in that the vendor selection happens that comes in, and the price tag is 20 million. And they're like, "Oh, we don't have that money. Can we get it down? Can we do this? Can we do that?" And so nobody wants to hear about total cost of ownership
no.
and that potential failure that's going to happen. So so they're like, "Hey, we we can't hear about that, or we're not going to do this project. And we have to do this project because we're suffering. We're missing this. We don't have reproducible science. We don't have fair data. We blah, blah, blah. We're not using the scientific method." All the things that electronic lab notebook is there to do, protect, and produce that model quality data so that you can extract it out of there and run a better in silico first or model first approach to things. And so this is what happens. Nobody wants to hear about that total cost of ownership because it freaks a lot of people out, and they never get to do the project when they really know how much it's going to cost them. It's the companies that embrace that TCO, understand it, and say, "Okay, this is really what it's going to take. We have to be honest with everybody internally here and do this right." They're super successful, but I can tell you it's not the norm.
Yeah, I would argue, no, I get that. I would argue that there's a more underpinning problem here, which is, and you mentioned about, model quality and in silico, and then you mentioned about fair and things like that. I would argue that companies treat these as soft value points, and that's the problem. They're not so for example, let's say a company's burning. What's a burning platform, right? There's a burning platform, we need to do ELNs better. Do we? I mean, yeah, sure, we're saying it in the boardroom, we're saying it at the C-suite. Do we really believe it? And I would
Right.
argue they treat it as a soft value statement, not hard value statement. And that's what causes these problems. I mean, it's a classic cost center issue. Cost center, that's what you're pointing to about R&D being a cost center. The cost
Yeah.
center issues are we need to do things better, but when it comes to it, it's not the same as putting another sales guy out there or making sure there's an application engineer to deploy customer deployment, to support customer deployment. It's kind of like a soft improvement, which we'll get to sooner or later.
I agree with you. I will tell you, I think of it this way. This is for me a very easy to understand analogy and very powerful, in my opinion. You have a toxic dump in a stream way 10 miles from here. It's going to pollute that whole stream, right? This just doesn't stop there and sit there. It's going to pollute everything downstream. And that's the same thing that happens in discovery and research. If you don't have things in order, remember, it's going from research to development. And when you throw junk over the wall or misinformation or missing information, now the development team has been poisoned. And now they have to go figure it out and make it all work. And the same thing happens then if you go from development into CMC and manufacture clinical, all of that. As you go down the stream, you're just poisoning the rest of the
Yeah.
organization if you
Yeah.
don't do it right up front. And
No,
that's really what ends up happening.
no, that's the situation, but we're talking about decision making at the C-suite and the board here. And reality check. if you're in the C-suite, you've got constrained funds across the whole thing.
Absolutely. And
So,
I get that. I
You're,
totally
you're
get
work
that.
you're working which burning platform do I focus on today? And it's like you said very well earlier, you're going to focus on the market access, the production and the manufacturing or sales, and then all the way back upstream until you get to clinical trials. And then prior to that, maybe a bit animal stuff. And at some point, it's sort of important, but not really the the thing you want to worry about.
Right. Right. I think there's another problem, and that is you have IT in organizations, and then the business, the science, the R&D, they feel IT's not doing a good job. Look, uh, I'm just gonna be very open about this. So what do? They start building their own internal IT called
Yeah.
shadow IT in some organizations. So in reality, if you look at some of the top pharmas today, they have their corporate facing IT, and then they have a whole nother shadow IT in their organization, which means they're almost double the size of what they should be. If they work together, if there wasn't this us and them mentality, they could work together and be one cohesive unit. They would be much more efficient and much more successful. But unfortunately, I think organizations have struggled on how to structure how IT informatics works together in these organizations to make it work. And um, this leads to a ton of technical debt as well and problems. And so that's a whole nother ball of wax that companies have to deal with on an ongoing basis.
I think you're spot on. It reminds me again, corporate organization. There's a theory that every 18 to 24 months, a corporation goes um, from silos to integrated. So you'll go from I want a big IT group to I want the IT group kind of dispersed, as friends of the within the other organizations, and they can't work it out, and they flip. They flip a lot.
Yeah.
I've seen that outside life sciences a lot.
I feel that why is this? Why does this happen? So again, we're talking about complex things here. So to say it's one thing would be childish. I think this happens for some key reasons. One is ignorance. Okay. And not a maligning type of ignorance, but ignorance of, well, I just don't understand this. I'm older now. I'm in a senior executive leadership position. I didn't have to deal with these things coming up through my career. And so I don't truly understand it, right? So how am I going to manage it? How am I going to um, establish it or innovate in this space if we don't get it, if I don't understand it? So I see a lot of this in the senior executive teams where they truly don't understand how to do this.
Right.
Um, and unfortunately, it's always a cost center that is scrutinized, but it's always a cost center that sometimes is just given money to try to make the problem go away. And I've done some analysis of different organizations and stuff and their efficiency levels and things like that. It's very difficult, but I do feel that there's this lack of understanding, but lack of knowing how to do this. You can't, and I've seen all different strategies too over the past 15 years. Um, oh, we're gonna do twice as much with half the amount of money. Okay. That's a recipe for disaster. It'll look good for the person coming in saying they're going to do this. And what they end up doing is they almost, in a blinding way, cut to the bone in the areas and almost destroy parts of the organization and lift another up. They'll get the accolades there,
And
but the
then
rest
and
of the
then they move
organization,
and then they
and
move
then they move.
on before
That's right.
before
That's
before
right.
Aaron, they're on to the next job. Yeah.
Exactly. And then the poor sap that inherits that next is like, oh my God, what did they do here? So there's that goes on. There's this bit of um, CIOs, chief information officer leaders that truly don't understand the data, like the whole data side of things. They're wrapped up in high level things concerning things, the security aspects of
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
But by the way, security is changing so quickly that, it is a very difficult job to have. It is all encompassing. And, the last thing anyone wants is their name on the front page of a newspaper in a data leak that has to do with patient data or anything like that. So
Yep.
these are all massively stressful problems. Um, but this technical debt um, can happen very quickly and build up to where it's constricting and uh, basically it becomes unmanageable.
I think
And
I think you're onto something about there was something kind of nuanced in what you were just saying about the sort of leaders there are. And you described two types of leaders, not explicitly, but I read that. One type of leader is somebody who's really good at corporate, has wisdom, understands the notion of how corporations need to deal with these problems, how you have to, how to the vision of responsibilities, making sure you're not creating a burning fire for future. I've seen it, done it before, whether it's in this industry, our industry, or in another from another industry, but they have that wisdom. The other one is people who understand the data, who understand the science. And it's very, very rare to find somebody who's been both. So,
correct.
so you walk into a room and you're dealing typically with one personality or another personality. Who's come up from the organization, who really gets it, but has never really seen these challenges before. As you said,
Yep.
that what am I supposed to do here? Because they've come up, they've through a vertical or something. They've a director, senior director, VP, senior VP. Now they're a big wig, but they've not really understood these classic organizational problems. Or somebody who's got a lot of experience with classic organization problems, but actually doesn't really understand the topic.
Correct. Absolutely. And you know what? It's okay to we used to say put bums in seats, right? It's okay to understand what those capabilities are, those missing capabilities, and that's where you build out a team that fills in the gaps and puts that together, and you have somebody at the helm that truly gets that big picture and knows how those different players contribute to the overall picture, right? And that's what makes it work, but I don't see it too often.
It's hard because if I know you're a big fan of six thinking hats, and if we take that kind of view of life, you've got different characters. The person who's come bottoms up, who's really a deep expert on whether it's data or science or whatever the areas, or clinical trials, for example, um, they will have a push mentality on, look, we need to do these things because they're the right things to do, and we will champion the right things. The person who's coming in from an organization will have a constraints mentality. We need to work
Yep.
within constraints. We need to innovate within constraints. And if one is leading and one is part of the team, that tension it requires um, a certain relationship to happen. Otherwise, it doesn't persist. I mean, this thing just falls apart.
Absolutely. And so what you see is IT organizations that can only service a portion of their client or customer base at
Mm.
and so what happens is if you're one of the lucky ones that they're able to work with and help, that's great. But the other ones that are neglected erode. And then now the cost to bring them back up to some sort of level playing field becomes unwieldy. And not only that, and we've talked about this before from an economics perspective, the whole artificial economies that we deal with. One of the most powerful things in it, in my opinion, again, I'm no expert when it comes to economics and stuff, is consumer confidence, right? The same thing is true in a large global IT organization. If your client base has a very low
Yep.
IT confidence, no matter what you do, you're throwing your hat in a room before you walk in there. You're sending in food,
Yep.
you're making all types of promises
Yep.
because it's a horrible interaction.
Yep.
And again, this contributes to the overall lackluster results that our IT organizations get because ultimately it comes down to us and them, and that is not a very um, nice environment to work in.
this is a real good one. I've got actually a little history example of how I've seen this successfully tackled. Um,
Hmm.
when I joined IBM in 2001 in Vermont, one of the I didn't take this, but one of the groups who gave me a job offer, I took another one, but was in a group called EDA, and this is EDA. It's design enablement, electronic design enablement. This is design tools. So this is semiconductor stuff, design tools, software for people doing design work. There's an analogy here. It's an IT group. And so the VP who ran that was a really smart guy. He had a problem. He'd just taken the job of running that EDA group. Think of it as an IT group. And he was every year for the fall plan going with his cup, penny, trying to get pennies from the various customers, internal customers. Very similar, right? Getting these pennies, getting enough the budget to pay his people, and making a whole Excel list of commitments out. Like you're saying, giving the cake, giving the cup of coffee, trying to get people to give their little bit. And he changed it. He immediately changed that relationship. So in the fall plan, he created a whole different set of discussions with these groups. He says strategically, we're all going to get together, and you got all these internal customers together, these design groups together, and said, okay, what are we focusing on here for you guys? And through those conversations, he created real strategic partners with partnerships with these folks, where they appreciated and they actually influence what the key top 5 or 10 strategies are for that IT group, and they absolutely locked in onto a multi-year programs, and a very good leader. And I think there's a
Yeah.
lot to be learned from that.
Yeah, no, that sounds great. And those are the types of things that have to be done. I mean, but it doesn't happen well in many organizations. And I what I see sometimes is, for example, if you look at like the U.S. Postal Service versus UPS, FedEx, other ways of doing it. Um, they can outperform governmental approaches or bureaucratic, dogmatic approaches. Um, and the same thing becomes true in an IT organization, a global, IT organization where that it becomes very bureaucratic, it becomes very constrained, and a consulting organization or a private organization could come in and kind of run circles around things. Um, and so it's a huge challenge, but again, when not done properly, it's just another example how technical debt can really build up because things are falling through the cracks. People aren't getting what they want. They start building their own things. They're not following any rules put in place, and that us and them divide becomes bigger and bigger. And what instead should be happening is, if done properly, a global IT organization could embrace the shadow IT in their customer base and work with them to enhance it and make it part of the overall footprint.
Yeah.
And trust me, it works really well when that's done. But it's not done well today in many places. So we're going to continue with these technical debt issues. Money's not going to be spent wisely, and unfortunately, some of these organizations aren't going to get what they're hoping to get. And the ones that suffer in the end are the end users, are the scientists, the researchers, the clinicians, et cetera, because their quality of work life suffers because they can't do anything close to what they do in their private or personal lives with the technology they have. And so it becomes again constraining and a poor quality of work life.
Yeah, and it shows. I mean, if someone could turn up and say, "Listen, I can get ChatGPT to write a script which does better than what you're giving me at work," what are we doing here? Um,
Yeah.
and the evolution of apps. So there's something called the API economy. This is a term. And what happened was, I think around about 2000s, mid 2000s, there was up until then everything was go talk to the IT team. And then suddenly these APIs became live. And when you have an API, you don't actually need to talk to the IT team. You could create an app at the edge. If you get an app at the edge, you have all these folks creating their own apps at the edge and ignoring the IT team. So the IT team are now, they're removed from the line of fire. Um, But that relationship problem occurs, like you're saying. It
Yeah.
wasn't in partnership. They just start to be ignored because if you give me the API, I don't need to talk to you.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're given the API with guidelines and rules and stuff and said, hey, it's just like any other variance type situation. It says, hey, here's the box we want you to work in. Okay. If you're going to come outside that box, just give us a call. Let's talk about it. Maybe we make the box bigger. Maybe we say, hey, we're going to come up with a better way to do this. Let's work together. Whatever it is, you almost need to you need to provide those bumpers or those guidelines instead of somebody coming in, you say, no, you can't do that. Sorry, no, 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 no. And the as a scientist, as a an automation engineer or whatever on the other side, you get very frustrated very quickly. Um, hey, the cloud was put in place, super efficient way of doing things, and all of a sudden IT puts this constraint over it, says, well, yeah, you don't have to wait 6 months now for an Oracle server, to get that, and then another 2 months to set it up and stuff. You can go right to the cloud within 5 minutes, do what you need to do. Oh, but we're sorry, we're going to have to do a security audit
Oh, it's good.
with
I knew you were
you.
going to security.
Yeah, and that's going to take 3 months, but we can't get to it right away because we're super busy. So it's probably going to be more like 6 months. And we're like, what's the point here?
Yeah.
What are we doing? Why are we having here? And this is another example of where you put the guidelines in place, you open up the usability, and you put a box around. You say, go have at it, right? So it's just super frustrating. Um, when you're in a large organization and you could get this done in minutes, hours, or days, and now it's taking weeks, months, or years. And it's this is what boils people's blood, right?
Right.
So you have to have a better environment of enablement. And this is what doesn't happen. And I won't say much more than that, but it's all doable, it's all achievable. It's just it's figuring out how to get out of everybody's way to do it.
Yeah, and I think you talk about dynamics between the different bodies. There has to be a kind of a shared responsibility, and there's fundamentals to this for it to work, which don't normally play to, when you've got turf, when people who are turf grabbing, it doesn't
Yes.
play to the
You
normal.
have to take your egos off when you come into the meeting room. Okay. So there's a lot. So, I think you might ask me earlier. If not, we do talk about this a lot, but we have ego problems in science, right? We have ego problems, unfortunately. And, you know, there's all different types of personalities out there. We've all seen them. And some people have to be the smartest person in the room, and some are going to fight or don't understand actually what things cost and how to do them, like to actually work with your hands. Many people don't have these experiences in their childhood, teenage years, even college years, of actually doing something with your hands and producing something and making it happen.
Yeah,
So they get into these, now they're in their career, and they're difficult to work with. They have no idea what they're talking about. They
yeah.
have no idea how it would even happen or how they would get this done. But yet they're screaming the loudest. And unfortunately, as we all know, that adage, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. This happens more than not. And it's just a huge problematic thing.
And they're very good. They have a skill. They're very good at creating a simple message about what needs to be done.
Yes.
All us intelligent people, we still love simple messages.
Yep.
Yeah, give me a simple message. I can latch onto it. I can go do it. It's a politics, right? Give me a simple message of who to vote for. And if I forget the complexities of everything, um, and simple messages have a way of punching through.
Simple messages and simple success criteria, right? Like, let's just achieve one thing here. Let's not boil the ocean. Let's not try to achieve 10 things. Let's do one, do it really well, figure it all out, and now move on, right? But it's difficult to have conversations with folks around project management, planning, how we're going to do it, how we're gonna is,
Look,
you know, I
it's complex. You can't. It's not simple. Even if it's one thing, it's not simple. It's complex.
exactly. There's nothing easy anymore. Nothing. So
Even with ChatGPT. Um,
so yes, exactly.
um, John, I think it's great. I think it's great. I mean, we should, with your permission, we should come back to technical debt several times over the next few months. Um,
Well, I think it should be part of our conversation moving forward on how do we guard, we talk about culture a lot. How do you guard the
yeah.
culture? But it's the same thing with technical debt, which is part of a cultural problem.
Yep.
We're going to belabor this, but how do you get a handle on it? I mean, the amount of money and problems and angst and everything that can be prevented by just putting a little foreshadowing or forethought, not foreshadowing, forethought into technical debt could save an organization, a lot of headaches, a lot of money, and improve their efficiency dramatically. And remember, at the end of the day, um, these mistakes are compounded. They cost companies in today's world billion-dollar discoveries and opportunities, right? It's just the it's just a fact. And so we're not the we're not messing around with little things here. This is people's lives, people's quality of life, and companies' organizational spend and organizational, quality of work life is very, very important.
Yeah, because you have users and users have emotions and they're overwhelmed. And if you mess with them, they switch off.
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks, John. Hey, it's pretty cool.
All right.
We'll chat next and keep
All
this one going.
right. Take care.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Bye.